So today we are going to be talking about how to administer PaaS compute options. So yesterday we talked about virtual machines, and virtual machines is actually one of the technology when it comes to Azure Compute. So Azure Compute, we have different compute options, virtual machines, Azure Kubernetes Service, Container Instance, App Service. I'm sure we talked about these during the fundamental class. And I explained that all these compute options that I just mentioned, talking about the container instance, Kubernetes service, app service, you know, functions, the underlying technology is still virtual machine. So regardless of the compute option, you are using. So do not get confused. So let's do this. So today, this is what we're going to be looking at. We'll look at the app service plan. We'll talk about the app service plan. Then we'll talk about app services, then we'll talk about containers, container instance, container app. Then there are 3 labs under this particular module, which we have the implement web apps, implement Azure Container Instance, and Azure Container Apps. I think I will be able to demonstrate all this, or it should be part of the demonstration for today. Then you guys can actually replicate that when you're doing yours. So the first part is for us to talk about the app service plan. And so the compute options, what do we use these guys for? What do we use all these resources for? So they are used for hosting our applications. So, we talked about the fact that we use, virtual machines to host our applications. When you host multiple applications inside one machine, all of them are going to take at least some part of the virtual machine. You talk about the CPU usage, we talk about the memory. So you need to allocate at least the memory, some part of the memory of the virtual machine to each application. But that's not possible because there is no way you can allocate it. Then that means one particular application can be making use of more compute space than the other. So that's why one of the reasons why we do not want to use virtual machines to host applications. Let's even say, yes, you are hosting just one application on the virtual machine. That's actually a waste of space. So that's why we look at some other compute options, to host our applications. So here we have the app service plan. Within the app service plan, that is where you deploy your application, which we call maybe the web app. If you are talking about the website, we can have what we call the function app. The function app, like serverless application in the sense that you just put in your code there, just your code. The way the developers are actually written their code without running it, without building it. For every application that we host, we do what we call building. We build it. We say, yes, let's see. After we have built this application, is it running? But for serverless, application, like if you are taking advantage of the Azure function, you do not need to build anything. The only thing you are hosting is just the code. Just the same way you've written the code, just put it there, and it's being hosted already. So the app service plan, I would say it encapsulates the application, the app service application. So it provides all the services needed for that app service application to run. So because within the app service plan, that is where you deploy, those virtual machines. But the only thing now here is when you talk about the other compute options, after, I said the underlying technology is still the virtual machine, but you will not have access to the virtual machine. because these are just platform as a service resources. So you will not have access to the underlying virtual machine. So the only thing you have access to is just a platform to host your application. So we'll talk about the app service plan, which, like I said, provide the resources that are needed by the app service applications to run. Then we'll talk about the plan pricing. So there are different pricing when it comes to app service plans. So we have plan like the basic, we have the shared, we have the premium, premium V2, premium V3, isolated. So those are just different app service plans or pricing you can choose from. So depending on the app service pricing that you've chosen, so the features are going to be different depending on the pricing type that you've chosen. So when you select the basic, there are some features you will not have access to. Features like auto scaling. So we talked about virtual machine skill set yesterday, where I explained that you can enable what we call auto scaling, where you have a burst of your instance. Let's say there is a lot of traffic coming into the application that is being hosted on that VMSS, which is the virtual machine skill set. So when the CPU level gets to 75% or 80%, depending on the rule you've set on there, you want another instance of that virtual machine to be created to cater for the traffic that is coming into that application. So that's what we talk about, auto scaling. It can be manual scaling, it might be automated. So if it's manual scaling, that means you need to be the one to actually monitor that CPU usage. So when it gets to 80, you'll be the one to create another virtual machine to add to it. So the same way we have that option or that feature running in virtual machine scale set is the same way we have it under the app service app service plan, where you can decide to scale out horizontally. So we'll talk about the scale up, where you are adding more compute power to the virtual machine, to the underlying virtual machine, or you are scaling out, where you add more compute, more instances to that plan. Then we see how to configure app service scaling, just the same way we've configured it yesterday, depending on some of the metrics. It might be memory based, it might be CPU based, it might be the number of requests that is coming into the application. So depending on what you want to use as your rule, then I'll show you demonstration on how to configure an app service plan. Then we can take it from there. So this is just explaining some of the things that need to be done when we work with the app service plan. So we'll talk about the regions, depending on the region where you're deploying your app service plan, the number of virtual machine instance, like I've said, you will not have access to the virtual machine instance after this has been deployed. However, the app service is still a virtual machine. The only thing, but you don't have access to maybe the operating system. When we talk about the shared responsibilities for PaaS, you don't have access to the operating system. You don't have access to the application on there. You are only presented with a platform for you to host your application. So you don't manage the security, you don't manage the operating system, you don't update the operating system. Those are actually being done by Microsoft. So the size of your virtual machine also, and that's why we were talking about maybe you want to scale up, you might select the small size, the medium size, depending on what you really need. Then we'll talk about the pricing tier, which is actually going to be on the next tier. Okay, so this is just talking about the app service plan. So like I've said, before you can actually run your app service application, you need to create what we call an app service plan. An app service plan provides the resource that is needed to run your app service application. And so that's just the simple explanation. So these are different, app service plan pricing that we have. So like I said, we have the free, we have the shared, we have the basic, we have the standard, the premium, and isolated environment. So depending on the pricing that you've selected, the features are actually different. So here you can host up to 10 applications. It might be web application, it might be mobile application, it might be API. Here we have 100. Here we have unlimited. However, when you are hosting 10 applications here, are you sure you can host it? Because you only have access to 1 gig of disk space. So will your 10 applications be able to even share that 1 gig of disk space? Same thing goes with when you have shared pricing, can go up to 100 application, depending on, regardless of the kind of application you are deploying, maybe be it the web application, mobile application, or API. So but you still have access to just 1 gig of disk space. Do you get what I'm saying? Now, same thing goes with the basic. So here you can see this free runs only for a certain time, a certain period. Yeah, I think just because they do not want people to start using it for production environment. So I think after, I'm not sure, but I know after some hours is being discarded. It will, if you not discarded, I think it only runs, yeah, it only runs for an hour within a day. So it runs today an hour, then it will run for the next 23 hours, then it will run for another 1 hour, the next day, then it will run for another 23 hours. So when you have the shared, let's say you want to do some testing before you move to production, and that's why we have, the basic and the share. The share means at least you're sharing, you might be sharing the virtual machine where you're deploying your app service on with another organization, and that's where you have the shared or the test, the shared. So the basic, this is dedicated to you. The virtual machine where you're hosting your app service plan is actually dedicated to you. However, there is a limit to what it can take also when it comes to, the disk space and the likes. So you have only, dev or test. It's just majorly for testing your application out before you move it to maybe the other environment like QA, like the isolated environment and the likes. Here, we talked about scaling out your application or your app service plan. When you have the free tier, the shared, and the basic, you cannot do any auto scaling. You cannot even do manual scaling for your free and shared. And that's why you can see maximum instance is 0, 0, which is dash dash. But this basic, you can still do manual scaling for it, even when the auto scaling is not available. So you can scale up to 3 instances, 3 virtual machines to run your app service plan. And no deployment slot. So let me explain what this deployment slot is. So deployment slot represents environments. So now let's say we have the dev environment, we have the test environment, we have the QA environment. So what we are doing is, instead of deploying my application directly into production and start managing it in the production, I can just, whatever testing I'm doing, or let's say my application is even live, so I can do a clone of that application and put it in any of the other environment like the test. So any improvements, any updates that is being done to that application, is done on the other environment. And when there is a need for us to now set that application to live, we can just switch whatever we have in the other environment to production, and switch what we have in the production back to maybe test or dev. And that's what the deployment slot does. So it gives us the avenue to create different environments where we do our testing and the likes, and we can just switch. It's just like the replication strategy in storage account, where you have the passive and the active. And when there is a need for you to switch, from passive to active, active back to passive, and that's the way it works here. So these three guys are production based. The only thing is depending on the feature that you really require. So when we talk about isolated environments, this is where we test out maybe new features. Forget about the dev now. The dev is just for us to build new features and the likes. So let's say we've even deployed to production now, and there is a need. The customer is saying, yes, you have this, can you add this, can you add this other thing. So we do our testing. Maybe you want to showcase whatever you have maybe in production, or you've added new features and you want to push it out and you want to showcase it to clients. So you might have that in the isolated environment. The your clients want to test out your application, but you do not want them to test it directly on the production because they've not yet paid. You are still looking at signing up the client, so you can give them access to the isolated environment and they can test it from there. So depending on what you want to do, so you can see the disk space, how many applications can be hosted. So depending on the pricing that you've selected, that's what you will get here. So we have the shared compute, where you run app on the same VM. So like I said, this is platform as a service resource. However, you will not see the virtual machine that is running your application. They are just the underlying, technology. So you will not see the virtual machine. You only have access to the platform. So you will see once we create, our app service plan. So the same way we've talked about this yesterday, during the time where I was explaining how autoscaling works in VMSS, which is the virtual machine scale set. That's the same way it works in the app service. So you can do a scale up by adding more compute power to the virtual machine that is hosting that app service application, or you want to scale out by adding more instance of virtual machine. So when you scale up, based on the size you've selected. When you scale up, you have the CPU usage, the memory, the disks. You can add more. Let's say you've created 250 gig before, and you want to scale up to 1 terabyte. Or the CPU, you want to change this CPU. That's one of the thing. Or you want to have, you can see dedicated virtual machine. You want to set some staging slots, some slots, or you want to add auto scaling. That's you scaling up. You've created the virtual machine, but you want to add more features. However, when you scale out, you want to add more instance of virtual machine to your app service, and that's what you can see here. So you can do the manual scaling. You determine the rules by yourself, or you can just set up an auto scaling and add the rule based on um, when the virtual machine or when the app service should add more compute instances. So this is just telling you just the same metrics, the rules that we talked about yesterday. How do you want to decide when your instance or another instance should be added? And this is telling you um what's the minimum instance that you want to have, what's the maximum instance that you want to have, what's the default. So let's say I have the maximum to be 10 and the minimum to be maybe 2, but the default, the minimum to be 1 and the default should be 1. So at any time, at any point in time, at least you should have one virtual machine running your application, your app service application. And that's what you can see. So here it's just telling you some of the things you can do. Do you want to base this on the CPU percentage, memory percentage, or the number of requests that is coming into your application? So, or you want to do the scaling based on maybe the weekdays, when it's during the weekend, maybe you have a lot of requests coming in during the weekend because people will be at home trying to shop on your store. Then you want to scale out during the weekend and scale down during the week. However you want to do it, that depends on what you feel like should work for your app service plan. So this is just okay. Let's do this. I'm just going to quickly share. I think I have my application. Okay, so this is how do we create? So create and deploy a simple app service plan. Then we'll review the scaling option. So I'm just going to search for app service plan. App service plan, app services. Don't mistake the app service with app service plan. So like I said, you need an app service plan before you can actually run your app service. So, but you can go ahead to create app service. While you are creating your app service, an app service plan will be created for you if you do not have any. Okay, so if to create this, I just need to click on create app service plan and give it a name. And let's hold on, this will load. Now this is okay, test plan. And I just go with the Linux, okay, let me go with the East US. So now, depending on the operating system you've selected, and now so the kind of plan you get also depends on the operating system you've selected. So as you can see, I selected Linux machine, and you can see the ones I have access to. These are just the free, the basic, and the premium. You can see the free, you get only 60 minutes per day for the free. So if I select the Windows machine, the Windows App Service plan, you see that I have access to more pricing plan. You can see the free, the share, the basic, so I'm just going to go with the Linux now. So also, if you want to do the zone dependencies and the like, so we do not really have much to do here. So it's just the basic, the tag and the review. So I'm just going to click on review and create. So this is telling me this memory is small, the size. So yeah, I can still do a scale up for this particular app service plan instead of scaling out because it's small size. I can go ahead to do, the large and the likes. Then the memory, I want to increase the memory also. So let's create this app service plan. Hold on. Right, so this is done. If I go to the resource, which is the app service plan that I've created, so here you can see currently we do not have any application. So if I click on the apps, you're not going to see any application because nothing has been added. So we only created the plan. We only created where the applications will be deployed to. So here you can scale up. You want to increase the power. What do you want? Is it, compute power? You want to change this, or is it feature based? Maybe you want to add auto scaling and the likes, and so is it feature based? Is it just hardware based? So depending on what you want, so you want to check if currently you use maybe manual and you want to change this to auto scaling, using some rules and the likes. So, or you want to scale out. If when you want to scale out, like I said, you are adding more compute power. So currently, let's see what we have. So currently our current instance is manual. Instance count that we have is just one. I can go ahead to put this to maybe automatic, or I want to set up a rule, then I'd say yes, we can have up to 30 instances, you know. So right now we have just one, but we can have up to 30 instances, and um, so sorry, this is the maximum burst per instance. So yeah, so you can scale out. So it should scale out at every point in time. There will be a burst of maybe one at every point in time. So that's that about just creating an app service plan. And this is where we set up the resources that are needed for our app service application to run. So I'm going to be deleting this because okay, so deleted that. Let's just continue with what we have. Now, let's move ahead to talk about the app service itself. Now, under here, we'll look at how to implement app service app. Then we'll create an app service app. We'll see the deployment slot I talked about. Then how do we add a deployment slot? How do we secure our applications, our app service? Can we add a custom domain to this app service instead of having something like um, an Azure generated domain? You want to have something like it360ng.com, devopsng.com. That's what this is talking about. Then how do we back up an app service? Then you can look at the demonstration on how to create an app service. So there are different. So like I said, when we talk about the app service, we're talking about the application. It might be a web application, it might be a mobile application, it might be an API. So we have different web app, different API, different depending on the language your application is actually written with. So we can have an application written with .NET, a .NET application, a Node.js application, PHP application. So your app service plan includes, these are some of the applications you can actually host on your app service plan. So here you can see it includes the web app. When we talk about the website, the API app, mobile app, function app that I said, instead of these are serverless application. You do not need to build your application. You only need to put in your code in there. And that's why it's called serverless application. Then it's a fully managed environment in the sense that you do not have access to the underlying technology. It's a platform as a service. You don't have access to that virtual machine that is hosting your application. You are only presented, as you can see there, you can see that we do not have access to our virtual machine. So it's not as if there is an IP address, of the virtual machine that is created in there and I can remote into it. No, I only have that platform to manage my application. So that's what this is talking about. And you can also do a custom, you can host, a custom Windows or Linux container on there. So how do we even, when we want to create an app service, just the same way we create other resources, what are some of the informations that are needed, when we want to create an app service? And that's what we have here. Number one is the name of your app service must actually be unique, just the same way we have it with the storage account, where you want a unique name, for your storage account. That's the same way we have it for the app service. So because whatever name you supplied in here is going to be, added, this Azure website.net is going to be added at the back. And so if I supply Babafemi, that means my website name will be babafemi.azurewebsite.net, and that's why your name, the name of your web app must be unique. So whatever web app name I've put in there, no one else in the world can actually use that same web app name, and that's why it have to be globally unique. Then we'll talk about, what kind of app service do you want to host? What's the strategy? Do you want to host your code? Do you want to host a Docker container or, a static web app? So static web app are application that you do not need to update frequently. Container, we talked about container, which are lightweight um, um, technology for hosting your application. So then the code, then the runtime is just telling you. This runtime is telling you what's the stack your application is designed with. Is it written with .NET? Is it written with JavaScript? Is it Python application? And that's what the stack means. So yeah. So the plan. Now you can see why creating your app service, you need to create a plan. And this is the plan, the pricing for the plan, just the same we have created it. And here it's enabled or disabled depending on if you want to have a zone redundancy replication option. So I talked about the fact that you can have what we call a deployment slot. A deployment slot where you have different environments where you deploy your code to, and you can always swap it at any point in time. So if you have this as production is running and you've added something to your staging environment or your UAT environment, regardless of what you've actually named your application, so you can switch it at any point in time. It's just something you want to fall back to. So auto swap, you can do what we call an auto swap. So this is it. You have the production is running. You've added more features to this your staging environment, and you feel it's ready. So you can swap this production to swap staging to production. And that's what the deployment slot, gives you. This is just telling you, what do you want to name your slot? So you can name it, can give it a name based on the environment, test, dev, staging, UAT, isolated, whatever you want to, you want to give to your deployment slots. So it's just for you at least to be able to have multiple sites. So yeah, you do not want to, let's say you want to update anything, you do not want to be doing that on maybe the production environment at some point, at any point. So you want to deploy it to your staging, test it properly on the staging, be sure that this is working just the same way the other features are working in the production environment before you do your swapping. And that's why we have deployment slots. So how do we secure our application app service, our application service? Just the same way, we've talked about the fact that we must have authentication using the IAM, the authorization using the IAM, sorry. Then when you do authorization using the IAM, what role are you assigning to your user on your subscription? What role do you want to assign to user on your app service? Do you want to give them an owner role that gives them the full right to do whatever they need to do in there, or you just want to give them a reader role? They are only able to view. So there are different ways to secure your app service. So let's start with the authentication. App service comes with, um, different ways to access the app service. Now, the first one is default anonymous. No, that is the default is anonymous. No identity provider selected. Now, you can also now add different identity providers. So when we talk about identity provider, we talked about Azure B2C, and I told you then that Azure B2C is a technology behind signing with Google, signing in with Microsoft that you guys use to see on most of these applications. So let's take, for example, Facebook. Almost at a point in time, almost everyone was actually frequent on Facebook. Maybe just the same way we might be frequent on maybe Instagram and TikTok now. So, and you feel like there is no reason for a user trying to access my application to come to my application dashboard and start creating username and password again. There is no point. I'm sure this guy, you know, has a Facebook account or an Instagram account or a Microsoft account. You know, why not adding, Facebook as an identity provider? Because what it does is Facebook has stored the identity of all the users. We know that the user account with some data is called an identity. So Facebook has the identity of most of my users. So when they are trying to access my application, they should use their Facebook, they should log in via Facebook. So that's why when you click on Facebook, so you have that option, log in with Facebook. When you click on it, it takes you out of the application and redirects you to Facebook. You go to Facebook, dashboard to authenticate. And when you've signed in, it now returns back to the application. So the signing, the authentication is actually controlled by the Facebook at that particular time. And that's why, you know, we have selected it as an identity provider. So it provides an identity of that user to my application. And that's what we mean by, all these third-party identity providers. So when we talk about, the security, you want to add SSL so that, your users' information are secured. You want to store, you want to even create, on a network access, just the same way we do this on our virtual machine where we have NSG, network security group, and we set up some rules, some inbound rules, some outbound rules. So what are some of the things we want to deny? What are some of the traffic that we want to allow? And the last thing will be your SSL certificate. When you log into some of the some of the website or web app that's being called here, you will notice that some of the web app has just HTTP because the developer has not added a certificate, an SSL certificate to that application. So in Azure, we store that SSL certificate into a resource called Key Vault. So Key Vault is actually a resource that is used to store sensitive information. So when you have password that you want to store, you have secret, you have certificates that you want to store, you store them all in the Key Vault. Then you connect the Key Vault to the app service. So that's why so we store the secret or the certificate in the Azure Key Vault. You can decide not to store it in the Key Vault, but it's not secured. So when you have security in mind, then you want to go ahead with Azure Key Vault. So this slide explains how you can actually use custom domain, or explain that you can actually use custom domain to access your application within your app service. So, you know, when I was talking about giving your app service a name, when you give it a name which is globally unique. So I've added Babafemi F or Babafemi B, and the extension that will be added to my application is .azurewebsite.net. So, but am I really serious as a businessman? I want to, give out my website to somebody, and I'm saying Babafemi B dot Azure website.net. It looks strange. It looks like, you sure this is not a scam? We've never heard of this kind of domain before. Yeah, it might be like that. So that's why you want to take advantage of adding a custom domain like that babafemi.com. It makes more sense than babafemi.azurewebsite.net. So within your app service, you can actually add a custom domain, just the same way you have it added to your enter ID. So when you add it, you verify it. It is not compulsory you have that same domain added to your enter ID before you can add it on your app service. So when you add your custom domain, there is a need to verify that custom domain to say, yes, we own this custom domain. Because if there is no check in place, I can just go and take google.com and add it and say, yes, this is the domain that I want to be using. And that's why you need to always verify, your custom domain anytime you add it to any resource within the Azure environment. So how do we back up? So you can run a manual backup, or you can actually schedule your backup. So scheduling your backup might make more sense in the sense that you might forget if you are manually backing up your app service, and at least let's have at least once in a day. Let the backup runs at least once in a day, should in case there is, maybe we have the web application, um maybe it got corrupt, and we want to restore it. At least let's have something within 24 hours and the like. So depending on the kind of pricing option you've selected. So if you select the free, the basic, or even, there is one other one I've forgotten. You will not be able to do the backup, or the shared, yeah. You will not be able to do the backup. So the backup requires you to have the standard or the premium app service plan. Then you can back up to 10 gig of your app and database content. So you cannot go more than that. So you can do a partial backup or a full backup. So when we talk about the partial backup and the full backup, so just like the way your WhatsApp backs up, the first time you are backing up your application, it takes a while because it's trying to clone whatever you have and put it in another location so that whenever you want to restore from there, you can go there. Then when we talk about partial backup, your system has backed up what you have since last year till yesterday, and you want to do a backup for today. So there is no point for the backup to start all over again from last year. It will only back up what you have done, today, to whatever has been there in the past. And that's what we call, partial backup. Then you can actually restore your backup at any point in time. So, and that's what you have at, restore an app on demand to your previous state. So if there is a downtime, because of maybe data corruption, you can just go back to yesterday as your restore point. Okay, so let's create a web app, verify the web app is running, and explore the deployment slot. Unfortunately, I've deleted my Okay. Okay, this has been deleted already. All right, so let me just create an app service. Okay, so I have an app service there already. You can search for it if you want to do that. Then let's create. So we want to create a web app, not a web app with database, not a WordPress, not a static, a web app. So, like I said, you need to give it, a name which is globally unique. So if I add this and I'd say, let's do, not sure. Okay, so this is available. So I'm going with code. I'm going to pick maybe .NET 8. So here we have, Babafemi dot Azure website.net, and that's going to be, the URL. Then, okay, so I can leave this one this way. So like I said, because I've deleted the app service plan, this is going to create a new one for me. You can decide to create it with your own name or the preferred name, but this is using the resource group name that I've actually selected. Do I want to go with the standard, the premium? I'm just going to keep the standard. I do not want any zone dependencies. So let's go here. Deployment slots. No, I'm not creating any database. Do you want to have a continuous deployment? No. Basic authentication, yes. Networking, let's see. So this is it. I can go ahead to just deploy this. If there is a need for us to change, the kind of app service we deployed, we can actually scale up the app service deployment. So let's wait for this to be completed. Then, so how do we verify that the web app is actually running? So we can do that by selecting the domain name that has been added, the default domain name, like I said, babafemi.azurewebsite.net. So I can have this one in another tab to verify that the application service is running. So that is been, you can see your web app is running and is waiting for content. So you can go ahead to start deploying whatever you need to deploy, but this is the default and it shows that the web app is running. So if I click here, this is where you see, the deployment slots where we can create multiple slots. You can have, depending on the environment that you want to have, you can have the multiple slots. So currently, the slot that we have is the production slot. That means anything I'm doing, it's going to be, directly to the production slot. So if I'm deploying my application, it goes directly to the production slot. So here, I can just give it another name and say, this is the dev. And do you want to clone whatever is in the production now? Yes, I can do that. Then clone. That means, so let's wait for this to complete. That work. Okay, deployment succeeded. Did I get any error? I mean, I want to check if, I think I got an error or something. Okay. So it's been deployed now. So you can see, yeah, it's been cloned. Then we have another URL, which is babafemi-dev.azurewebsite.net. So to us, we only have access to that URL internally. So we can do whatever we want to do internally. So if I check this guy, this will also be running, there is no traffic coming into that application slot now, a deployment slot now, because we are actually making use of the other one, which is the production. So let's wait for this guy. So if let me just, instead of waiting, I know. So this is the site, and you can see this same thing is being loaded. So I can go ahead to start, deploying my application to this dev side, test it, and when the test is done, then I can change the deployment slot by clicking on the swap here, and I swap it with the production. This is the source, this is the target, and you just do your swapping. So then the dev will be the production, then the production will now be the dev. So that's how we do our swapping. Okay, so I'm going to delete this guy again. So I've created two. So I'm going to delete this guy, and yeah, so I will do that later. All right. Now let's move ahead to the container instance. Yes, we talked about the fact that we can use a virtual machine to host our application, but to host this application in an isolated environment, we just want to package the application, and whatever the application needs to run on, we want to package everything within just that container. So the file system, the application code, every other thing needed for the application to run. Because you guys noticed that when I was creating my app service plan, I needed to select if I want to host it on Linux or on Windows. And this is because it's actually dependent on the operating system you are running your application on. So if you want it to be an application, so maybe you targeted a Linux application, you'll be able to run it just on Linux. If it's Windows, then Windows. And that's why. But for container, regardless of the operating system, regardless of the device, the container will actually run on it. So that's one of the advantage of actually using a container. And like I said, container are lightweight. You can spin up a container within seconds. It's as against a virtual machine that takes time. You spin up the hard drive, you spin up the storage, you spin up the VNet and the likes before a virtual machine is created. So, and for every virtual machine that you create, you need to have an operating system. You can have multiple containers running in just one virtual machine, and all of them shares just one operating system. You do not need to create operating system for each of the container. So yeah, we'll talk about what's the comparison of containers to virtual machine, which is what I just talked about. Then we explore some of the benefits of using a container instance. Then how do we implement what we call a container group? This is just collection of containers. Then Docker platform, which is optional. Docker is just a technology for building a container. So when we talk about Docker, you guys will maybe you might have heard of Docker. Maybe you just checking videos on YouTube and you hear people talking about Docker. So Docker is just the technology behind creating a container. So Azure, we talked about the fact that Azure Kubernetes service or Kubernetes service, is used in hosting container. Kubernetes service doesn't create a container. So we need what we call a container runtime. And Docker is actually a container runtime. What does container runtime does? They are used in creating containers. So Docker is actually a platform, one of the platforms, that is used in creating container. We have other ones. Then the demonstration will be centered around creating a container instance. Then we can look at how to manage container. Then the demonstration on how to configure Azure Container apps. So just the same way we have the app service plans, then we have app service app, which is the app service. That's the same way we have container instance, which hosts the container apps. So that's the same way. So the app container instance or the Azure Container Instance, you know, host the resources that is needed to run or host your Azure Container apps. So this is just the way we compare a container to a virtual machine. So you can see each of these machines here, they have their operating systems, and this is the libraries, the beans to run your application. So it sits on the virtual machine, and each machine. So yeah, this is what this means. We have a server here, which is our physical server that is going to host our application. So back in the days when Microsoft started with virtualization, because the traditional way of hosting our application was to purchase a server and put applications on the server. If we have one application, then at least we can say, yes, the application is running on this particular server. The application might be underusing or underutilizing the server features. So like the CPU, the memory, maybe the application is just consuming 1 gig out of 250 gig. Then we cannot add more applications, because when we add more application, we might notice some disruptions. Some application might take all the memory of that particular server, and the other applications are left with nothing. So some of those applications might be lagging, there might be slowness, you might notice that. Then on that particular server, we have an operating system, which is the OS. It might be Windows, it might be Linux, and whatever. On that, we have what we call Hyper-V, which is you trying to now, create different chunks of virtual machine. You are doing what we call virtualization. Now that virtualization gives you access to host multiple virtual machine on that container. So after the traditional way of hosting our application, then comes what we call the virtualization, where instead of you hosting just one application on one server, you want to host multiple applications on that particular server. But how do you do it? You cannot just host it directly. You need to create multiple virtual machines. And on each virtual machine, you now host each of those applications. Let's say you've created 4 virtual machines, then you host one application per virtual machine. And that's what you have as the hypervisor. Then on each of the virtual machine, each virtual machine, you need to create an operating system. Then we have the beans for the application, then the application. Here you can see we have the server, the OS, then we have the Docker engine, which is the runtime for deploying the container. Then you can see the containers. So we have the container doesn't have operating system. That's why they are lightweight. That's why you can spin them up within seconds. So you can see it's packaged here. We have 2 applications even running within one particular container. And you can have multiple containers running on just the server. So that's how we compare this. So we'll explore the container instance is also a PaaS service, which is platform as a service. All these containers you're seeing is still being hosted on virtual machine, but you don't have access to the underlying virtual machine. The only thing you have access to is the container instance, where you can host your container application. So these are some of the benefits of application Azure Container Instance, the fast startup time, like I said, you can spin up a container within seconds. So you can have public IP, connected to the container just the same way we have it on the virtual machine and the likes. So it's an isolated environment, and that's why you have the isolated features. Custom size, you can create the container to customize the size. This is how large you want your container instance to be. This is how small you want it to be. Persistent storage means that you can attach a storage directly to your container so that when one of the container, when it goes up or powers or is corrupted, is not working again, you can take that storage and attach it to your new container. And that's what we call persistent storage. So you can run your container, be it on Linux, Windows, you can do what we call a container group, where we have collections of containers and the likes running your particular application. Then we look at, virtual machine deployment. So container groups, this is what I was just talking about, collection of containers that get scheduled on the same host. So when we talk about host, we are talking about the virtual machine instance, and that's what we call the host. So you can have a container running maybe your database, the container running your web app, container running maybe the front end, the back end, and you have all of them in the same on the same host, on the same virtual machine, and that's what we call a container group. So you can see we have what we call the Azure file, and Azure file is a storage account, right? And it's attached to the container group. That means whatever is actually stored here can actually be accessed by those containers. And you can add, a custom domain or a DNS name to the container also, so that people accessing it from outside can actually access, it's just going to be like a single container, a single application, because you've packaged those containers into just one container group. So that's what we have as container group. So this is optional, and this is just explaining how the Docker, which is the technology creating your container, how it works. So you do not need to worry yourself about this for now. When you guys get to the DevOps course, we'll talk about the Docker. How do we create container, and what do we have in the Docker engine? All right, so this is another demonstration to create and configure a container instance and verify the deployment of the container instance. So let's take a look at this. And so let's search for container instance. So container instance. So let's create a container instance. So I'm going to the same resource group, give it a name. That's a name. Availability zones, no. I'm just going to go ahead with the quick start image to the one from Microsoft. So like I said, when you create your application, you are creating a container. So each container that you create, you need to create what we call an image. And this image, when you start it, that is what becomes a container. So let's go to networking and just give it a label. And let me say we have Babafemi. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's just the DNS name. So I'm going to go ahead to create this. Okay, that's fine. Okay, Falajin, please go ahead before I continue this.
Yeah, please. I just quickly want to ask if the group container you talked about, is it also the same thing as the Kubernetes?
The container group is just collection of containers that runs the same, or that service the same application, or that is being scheduled to run on the same host. Kubernetes is an orchestration tool for managing multiple containers. So Kubernetes manages the container. So container group is just a collection of containers.
Okay. Thank you.
Do not worry yourself about containers. Okay, so we created a container instance. Let's see. I've added an FQDN. So we should see. Based on what we have in the image that have been created. This is taking all the time. Okay, yeah. So yeah, just shows you that a container has been created. Welcome to Azure Container Instance. So a container instance has been created. All right. You can see me deleting all these things, I have just £1 left. And I will need that to at least complete all the labs I'm working on. I'm so sorry. Let me see. I think I know.
So are you going to create another account since your money is left with £1?
No, I will need to wait.
Okay.
I need to wait till the so this is the way my subscription works. Because it's an MCT subscription, it's the one I earned when I became an MCT, a Microsoft certified trainer. So I get $150 every month, so I'm going to wait for them to the cycle of that subscription to complete. Then the 150 will automatically be reallocated to me.
Okay.
You
I hope that
guys
is not going to slow us down.
No, it's not. We don't have any training tomorrow. Do we? We don't. So that's not the problem. I just need the subscription to quickly create the other videos I'm making the labs. But all right, so that's about the container instance. Now let's carry on. So we verified the deployment of the container instance by running the FQDN, and we got that. So now let's now talk about the container application. Alternative to Azure Kubernetes service, which is the manage container orchestration. So the container instance, so we deploy our container apps within the container instance. So it's used for hosting our container application. But there is a limit to what the container instance can manage. And for the Kubernetes service, it managed, like I said, is an orchestration tool for managing, majority or a lot of containers. So we have, and that's where, we manage container instance. This is just an alternative. Now, the container app environment creates secure boundary around app and jobs and the like. So, the container app runtime that this is talking about is talking about the Docker platform we just, talked about. It manages the environment, the runtime manages the scaling, the versioning, and this is the same thing, the Azure Kubernetes Service does, but Azure Kubernetes Service has a lot of features to manage our container application effectively. Here, what do we call the registry? You can see when I was trying to run my container instance, I needed an image, and that image, the web application, the application that has actually been deployed in that image is what you saw the other time. Now welcome to Azure Container Instance. That's the application itself that has been packaged into an image. So when you have your image, or when you have your image package, you need to push it to a database. It's not called a database here, it's called a registry. So for Azure, where do we store our container images? They are stored in Azure Container Registry. Docker has its own also, which is called the Docker Hub. So you guys will get to at least familiarize yourself with it when we start talking about, or when we get to, the DevOps. For people that still wants to go ahead with, the Azure DevOps course. So that's what this is doing here. Oh, we're creating a deployment again. Okay, so this is asking me to create the container application now and verify the application URL displays the welcome URL, which I've done already. So so we can go ahead to, I think we did the container instance, but within the container instance, I actually deployed that. But let's do the container instance, the container app only now. So container app, I'm gonna pick this CI/CD. I'm gonna name it. Okay, I can go ahead to give it test. And so Central East US. Okay, that's fine. Let's see the container. A simple hello world. Then do we have a binding? No, I do not want to bind anything. Then I can just go ahead to create this. Okay. Let's wait a while. It tells you if it's running or not. And this is the container app environment. This is the URL to the container. This log analytics is just like a workspace to get everything that is going on within the container app. And this is where you have your secrets. If you want to add a certificate, you can have a key vault attached to these. These are the containers that are running. Where do we have, if you have a volume, like you want to store anything, you can have, the volume. If you want to add a custom domain to your container, you can add that there. And so this is, as you can see, this is just like the app service. So the main thing is the underlying technology is still the same across all these compute options. It's still the virtual machine that is doing this job. So regardless of the compute option you're working with, the Kubernetes service, the container instance, the app service, the virtual machine skill set, the underlying service or the underlying technology is still the virtual machine. And that brings us to the end of this class.